Hi and welcome to Serious About Sustainability, the podcast series brought to you by Mitsubishi Electric Ecodan air source heat pump. I'm Russell Dean from Ecodan, and today's podcast is Zero Carbon House. My guests are George Clarke, the Ecodan ambassador, and Oliver Novakovic, the Technical and Innovation Director at Barratt Developments Plc. Welcome to you both. It's great to have you on today's podcast. What I wanted to start off really was over to you, Oliver. Really, if you could tell us more about your background and where you've come from on the construction industry.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. So originally I started my career developing self-build all the way back in Cornwall and developed the first off-site construction MMC system. And from there worked my way to BRE, where I helped innovation outside of the construction sector with people like Marks and Spencers and Audi, which was interesting. And then in the last 7 years, I've been with Barratt, driving sort of innovation and the zero carbon agenda.
Excellent. Interesting background. And at your latest big project at Barratt was the zero carbon home. That's what you put a lot of energy into.
The Zed House, yeah, as we like to call it, some original marketing there, just getting rid of the ERO. So it's like,
that keeps it short and sweet, doesn't it?
Short and sweet. So yeah, that's the latest. But you'll probably be aware. I mean, back in nearly 10, 12 years ago, Barratt did their first sort of concept house at the BRE. Yeah. That's how the introduction between myself and Barratt occurred. So this is just another step because actually government have come back to the zero carbon agenda finally. And so we thought it was important to kick the tires and test it.
And just stepping back to the BRE a bit, I mean, I've been to the BRE a lot because, with the kind of innovation park setup that you've got, I mean, it's pretty incredible, isn't it, as a place for testing and pushing innovation, particularly with green products and green technology?
Well, when I first started the BRE, that was the big challenge. I really wanted to bring the supply chain together, architects and everybody, consultants and supply chain, and challenge it. And so we came up with the Innovation Park. And as you know yourself, we had the greenhouse was Barratt, but we've had over... they've had now.
You were there before, that's fine.
Yeah. So they've had, 16 houses? And Prince Charles built a house out of using hay and stuff like that, all the way through to modern construction, all driven by carbon, embodied, looking at the health within the home. So in a way, for me, the Zed House is just a continuation of that, and there'll be many more, because we've got to keep challenging the sector, haven't we?
So tell us about Zed House.
So the Zed House was very much sat back at Barratt looking at all the challenges coming over the hill. So, of course, the natural one we think about is operational energy and the zero carbon. But actually, very quickly behind it is embodied carbon, water reduction, waste reduction, nature around the house. So all of these challenges are coming to house building, and they're coming very quickly. So for me, it was about like the car manufacturers do concept cars, and they say, well, what are the ingredients we've got to make the best cake? But we want to throw all of them in this big cake. That's what we did at the Zed House. We said, right, let's get the supply chain and challenge them, guys like Mitsubishi and others. Let's get them to this house and let's set the challenge. So I've got there's some great stories around the Zed House.
And I mean, obviously we can't physically see it. I wish we were there having a look around it now, but just paint a picture of what it's like in terms of design and innovation.
Yeah. I think the most important thing for me was that the Zed House looked normal. So the Zed House is actually called an Alderney. It's one of the houses we build many thousands of. We have 400 sites, so we're selling a lot of these, so we know customers like the house. The second most important thing was that you could be green in this house without having to try, without a change to your lifestyle. So if you were to walk up to the Zed House, you wouldn't know that it was a zero carbon home. And if you walked around it, except for an air source heat pump on the outside, which wouldn't be normal in today's house, and some of the innovative heating systems like infrared and skirting boards that deliver heating, you wouldn't know. You'd just live a normal life, but actually you'd be saving 70% of the energy that you'd usually use. That's quite a lot, isn't it?
So skirting boards deliver heat energy?
Yeah. So you'll know with the air source heat pumps, the temperature of the water reduces down to 40, 45 degrees, so you need a lot more surface area. The problem in the houses is surface area delivered by radiators mean they could be quite big, and where radiators get in the way of furniture and other things. So Salford University actually introduced us to this innovation where the hot water goes into the skirting board. that all of your skirting boards are the radiator.
So you've got no other radiators in the house?
So in the Z house I have,
Right,
because
okay.
I'm testing. But actually, in some of the other houses we're now trialling, we won't have radiators. We'll either have skirting board heating or underfloor heating.
So multifunctional skirting board.
Yeah.
Love that.
And what's great about it is that you can also put electric down it. So, as you know, as we move further along the zero carbon agenda, we're going to really concentrate on fabric.
So the skirting board's a bit like ductwork for running services.
Yeah. So as you know, in offices, we've regularly ran electrics, haven't we, down the service. Here, we're running hot water in the skirting board.
These houses are built in a more innovative way, aren't they?
Yeah, very much so. So one of the challenges we set ourselves is, could we build a house without a bricklayer, without a scaffolder, and without a tiler? Not that that's the way it's going to go, but how far could you go? Mm-hmm. And with the Z house, we didn't use a tiler or a bricklayer, and for part of the house, we didn't need a scaffolder. And
so
that's
if you didn't use a bricklayer, what's the outside of the house?
brick, but it's made it's brick that's manufactured in a factory and brought fully to the site.
Prefabricated.
Yep, yeah. Prefabricated brickwork that came in sort of 6 to 8 metre lengths by about 2 to 2.5 metres high.
So why have Barratt's decided to do this now?
Well, I think, as I said to you, that if you look at what all the regulations that are coming, and more importantly, it's not just about regulation. I think what's great, I mean, from my days at the BRE, I felt, and I'm sure you're the same, George, we used to be pulling everyone along. Come and be zero carbon, be carbon conscious. And, people are like, oh, it's a strain. Now, I feel like I'm getting dragged along because, you've got the city looking at you reducing carbon. You've got, at Barratt's, we've set science-based targets. Most corporates are now setting their carbon reduction because they have to and they want to. We've got mortgage lenders starting to talk about green mortgages because they want their portfolios to be lower. So that's from a carbon point of view. From a water point of view, we have scarcity in certain locations. We've got to be more careful about how we use water. Embodied carbon, with resources, we're running out of materials. We better use them more efficiently. And I know the old adage, we've got to look at it for our kids, but it's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's be honest. I mean, that kind of, we don't have the resources we had 50 years ago. I mean, just the nature bit, I didn't know this, but 40% of UK species have died out since the 70s. 40%.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
So we're about, in the garden with RSPB, we've put homes for the animals.
Bat boxes. Well, bat boxes, go on.
Bat boxes, swift boxes, hedgehog homes. We've got a green wall for insects so that they can pollinate and create that, and we've got water ponds and different sort of situations so they can feed themselves. Yeah, well, and then that's probably the newest bit to me is that nature bit. If I'm quite a techie, as you know, I'm an engineer, so that was the bit I thought, oh, and it was the 40%. I thought, blimey, that's a lot.
And what's the link with Ecodan?
So we've had quite a long discussions over the years with Ecodan. I think it's Mitsubishi. They've got a good brand and a good name. But actually what we were really excited about is that they manufacture in the UK up in Scotland, which is great. And we just found that they really understood the technology and they understood, most importantly, our customers and maintenance and how, and probably gave us the right technical support. So we said, right, if we're going to do the first house, let's do it with them.
And now sorry, Russ, I'm just piling on over this interview.
Right, I think just to add on to that, I think what we have is experience. We've been doing it 13, 14 years now, and it's not just about the heat pump. It's not just about the box. I think where you're going with that is about the support around there, because it is a transition for house builders. It's a transition for installers and homeowners, and also what happens after the box is installed and it's commissioned. And I think we've had such a long time now in this market that we thought all those steps through to the point where we service and maintain the systems and look after them as well. So I think you can't just make, and as an engineer, you want to make the best box in the world. You can't just make that best box without having the other stuff around it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. There's a couple of things, for me about the air source heat pump. So one, when we did them before, people thought they were noisy. Mm-hmm. Thought about maintenance. It's been 10, 12 years since those days. So now if you come to the Z house, you can't hear that air source heat pump. You talk about maintenance, it's done from outside. It's done automatically from external.
Yeah, it's remotely.
It's remotely maintained. Yeah. And I think something like 70% of most queries can be dealt with remotely. I think the other thing people don't understand is actually the air source heat pump. There's two important components. The air source heat pump, which everyone looks at and thinks fantastic energy and engineering, but actually it's the cylinder as well. They're just as important, aren't they, together?
Yeah.
And that's part of what Mitsubishi have, been helping work with us, because, we deliver 18,000+ homes, right? At some point, I'm going to have to put in possibly 14 to 16,000 air source heat pumps. So we've got to really robustly know what we're doing. And, Mitsubishi are, part of the partnership that we're looking at to do that.
And obviously when you innovate on a concept house, that's brilliant. It's great R&D. You test and test and test. And how much of an impact and how quickly do you think it'll have an impact on the rest of what Barratt's do?
If you look at, I suppose, in 3 key points. So there's some technology we already use today. So there's something called wastewater heat recovery. It uses the shower hot water and recycles it back in. So that technology we use today. The PVs, that's the new regulation comes out on the 15th of June.
Mm-hmm.
As of that new regulation, we're going to have to use PVs and inverters. So that technology, as of the 15th of this year, we're going to have to consider.
So photovoltaics, for electric.
solar, solar hot water as well, but solar panels.
Solar panels, solar thermal.
Yeah. And then after that, you start looking at air source heat pumps. So whilst they might regulatory kick in 2025 because we're getting rid of gas, so we're going to electric, the reality of it is we've already got local authorities and some key projects where we're looking at air source heat pumps. So we've got a project down in Bristol, Nunney. We've got 82 air source heat pumps. And I don't know, maybe you can help me with this, but Russell, I think it's one of the bigger projects that's been done in the United Kingdom at 82. Would that be correct? Or for low rise, I should say, not for apartments?
I'd say it's different for different markets. If we were talking about retro and social housing, where we've got some social housing clients that are putting 1,500 heat pumps. So on that kind of scale, and they were installing 10 a week. So, and that's slightly more difficult on the retro side. New builds, you're probably right, for 82 houses.
I haven't heard of many, and it's important we do it.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like when someone said to me, that's one of the bigger projects, I was thinking, well, then we need to do more.
Yeah.
Because we need lots of experience in this. So this is the first of a few that we'll start doing.
The main driver really for heat pumps going into new build is off gas to grid developments.
Yeah.
And that was the best kind of commercial decision that was made there. So, 82 is a good sized project.
Well, it's a start.
Yeah.
Like I said, we're heading towards 16,000, so we better start somewhere.
We better get ready.
And with modern methods of construction, I'm just thinking about the difference that makes to everything, really. I suppose how quickly you build a house, minimal site works.
Yep.
It's probably quite an inspiring way of building a house as well to young people coming into the industry.
Oh, definitely. So we've just done a major project with about 600 school kids up near Sheffield. And it's interesting, what we actually did a game around sustainability and building a house and running around a site. And you're dead right. What they really got into was robots that build houses, which is what we're going to end up with in factories, digital design, and the engineering to deliver zero carbon. That's how we're going to bring these guys and get their interest. So that it was great. And it was all from a science background. So these were, I think, 14 to 16-year-olds all doing sort of science. So I think that the MMC and that aspect's definitely going to interest them.
Yeah, it's interesting because, my granddad was from a traditional form of building, if you like, quite conventional. And when I was growing up, it was like get a job as a bricklayer or a plasterer or electrician, or a plumber. And actually, I think the conversation's starting to change quite a lot when you're looking at something being designed for manufacture rather than designed for construction. As soon as you think about manufacturing, you think in a different way. You're thinking about a different product. I kind of used to joke and say, if you're going to build a car from scratch, you wouldn't build it outdoors in a field and start rendering the outside and plastering the inside of a car. It's a kind of clean, dry tech bit of engineering. And that's actually the exciting way that house building's gone, where we're trying to get rid of a lot of wet trades and actually do skills transfer a little bit, where We don't want to be in a position where people are all losing their jobs because they're plasterers and they're bricklayers, because there's still a role for that. We've still got like 25 million existing houses that need plasterers and bricklayers and plumbers and electricians. But I think by being slightly more clean tech and having factory built homes, it's quite inspiring, I think, for young people to want to be in that industry.
Yeah.
Because there has been a bit of an image reputation about construction over the years, definitely, where it's a kind of dirty, messy building site and male dominated. And I think that's starting to change, actually, which is really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good points. I think, construction was always possibly, if you didn't quite get the results you wanted, threw you into construction. But I'm interested in your point there, George, because for me, I think you've got the designers and engineers that clean tech's going to interest, but it's an and. We are still, for now, going to need those bricklayers and plasterers, both for refurb and new build, because to build 300,000 homes, which is government's target, we'll need MMC to grow, but we'll need the current system to stay and the transfer of skills. So I think it's an exciting time. And I think sometimes people do actually enjoy being out in the rain and snow, putting bricks together.
Yeah, I don't. Not so much, to be honest.
Nor do me. But I'll tell you what, they don't half earn bad. They earn good money now.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about this in other podcasts, where in some ways it's a period of transition. You can't just, it's not about completely revolutionizing everything in one day, because you just can't do that. You can't just stop the way that we've done things for many years and say, right, we're going to start doing it this way from tomorrow. That's just impossible. I mean, in some ways, it's about kind of innovation and invention. Everyone thinks invention kind of changes everything, but sometimes invention only comes about because there's been lots of innovation to get there. Lots of things happening in the background and lots of people plugging away at lots of different things before there's a kind of eureka moment where you go, oh, hang on a minute, we might have just cracked this. But even when you've cracked a design challenge or a zero carbon challenge, even that has to be innovated and developed. Do you know what I mean? So I've always got a problem when people say they've invented something, because you go, actually, it's very, very, very rare. Most of the times it's many different companies or many different individuals, and now academic institutions, universities and colleges might be doing R&D on something, and it's constant innovation before there's even a hint of invention.
Agreed. And I think it's evolution.
Yeah.
So it's not, that it's evolving the technology, and that's what this I think it's fair to say with Mitsubishi, it's evolved. So acoustics was something that needed considering. It's now evolved into a much better system.
Yeah, because everybody thought a unit outside your house was really noisy. They just did.
Well,
everyone thought that, and now it's not.
I think the manufacturers at the start, when we came up with a heat pump, it came from the air conditioning model, which wasn't really on residential properties in the UK, more on a commercial roof, so noise wasn't a big problem. And most of that R&D went into the efficiency of the system, just trying to make the most efficient box that we could. And then fast learning that noise was going to be incredibly important. So the next stage of that evolution was, it's acoustic performance. And then moving into this stage where it's controls, it's demand side response, it's the smart home and how that heating system can interact with demand from the grid. So that's the next. And then, of course, aesthetics is something that we'd have to consider as well, because it is essentially a box outside the house, and people want it to look at a certain type.
Yeah, but I think that's interesting with all forms of renewable technologies, though. I think there's areas where you can't add green kit onto your house because of planning restrictions, and you could argue that if someone does it insensitively, that's bad design as far as I'm concerned. And I've seen solar panels being put on roofs where you think, hang on a second, that's awful. But then the industry have gone, well, hang on, how can we embrace that technology and integrate it into roof tiles? So the roof tile becomes the solar panel. And it's the same with air source heat pumps.
Yeah.
If that unit's not positioned in the right spot or it's not installed in a nice way, it's not great for the look of a house. But when someone really considers it and thinks, well, hang on a minute, we could put it around the side or we could give it a different look, then that's all about good design. I mean, as architects and designers, that's what we've got to do. We've got to kind of design in that technology so it looks really, really good.
I just wanted to come back to a point you made earlier, Oliver, about all of us been in construction quite a while. The target of 300,000 homes, every time someone says that, the government target is 300,000 homes, there's a little snigger that goes out because we never quite get there. On the point of view from a house builder, what do you think it is that holds it back from getting to that 300,000? Is there any?
So post-war,
yeah,
we built 480,000 homes. That was back in the late 50s.
A lot of them were rubbish, though, Oliver. You've got to be careful about that.
But the point was, yes.
Do you know what I mean?
No, but the point was, why were there... I mean, I was at the BRE and wrote the book on it. So the reason they were rubbish is because the controls weren't there. It's very different now. You know, between BBA and HBC accreditation and everything we've got.
No, I get that. I think my point was some of them were rushed.
They were.
And it was rushed really, really quickly. So then standards were compromised.
Oh, definitely. And I agree. But the point is we're talking 40 years ago, we still produced 480,000 homes. And we're asking for 300,000 from an industry that's a lot more mature.
No, I get that.
So for me, part of getting to the 300,000 is the journey. I think it's what you said, George. It's the evolution of our industry to take MMC on board and continue with traditional. And we need to consider being a little bit more managing our risk to allow those numbers to increase. So that, you know, as you know, with Barratt, our doors are open to innovation, but we have lots and lots of hoops you have to jump through. And that's just to make sure that exactly what you just said is when it's built, the customer, they're spending a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's got to be right.
My controversial view is I'd prefer we built a little bit less better. But that doesn't tick the boxes of housing ministers who want to make grand announcements about we built lots of houses this year. And it's about what we build and where we build it as well. So, you know, there's a whole discussion about that, about what you build in certain parts of the country compared to others. And I can sit here banging on about how fantastic modern methods of construction are in factory-built homes, but that takes a lot of investment, a massive amount of R&D. You know, you are in effect coming up with a new form and a new way of building a house. And yeah, I'm involved in a company that does that as well. And it's actually costing us a staggering amount of money to just get that shift in skills and retraining and getting people to think differently and bringing people in from other industries who aren't from a construction background to make us more factory people, if you like. But then at the same time, some of those people you go, well, all right, you might know how to build a car or an aeroplane or do a bit of product design, but they don't know about the home building industry, which is very different, where we've got to deal with planning and land and funding and mortgages. I mean, I'm bad at it. I sometimes try and compare the construction industry with the car building industry, and sometimes that's a mistake. You should just look at that on a very simple level of saying, well, it's a product built in a factory. But you could say the same about an iPhone or a Dyson hairdryer. But a Dyson hairdryer doesn't need land. It doesn't need a 25-year mortgage. It's not probably the most expensive thing. It's probably the most expensive hairdryer you've ever bought in your life, but not the most expensive thing. And, you know, when it comes to homes, it's really complicated. You know, when it comes to insurances, planning, land, dealing with the planning system alone. When I say planning, I meant that in the broader sense of the word. But it's a very, very complicated, much more serious business than buying a car that you might just have for 10 years and sell on, or a hairdryer you might only have for 3 and get rid of and replace with something else. We need traditional forms of construction. There are parts of the country where traditional building is without a doubt the right thing to do, where you've got those right skills and planning is kind of asking for a more conventional, traditional form of construction. Whereas in other parts of the country, you go, hang on a minute, there's a chance here where we could do things differently. You know, where there's an industry background and a manufacturing background, and that's where the skills are.
It's a good point, and we've talked about this quite a bit over the time working together. But what do you think, Oliver, that's missing, that mechanisms or support from the government that's missing that would help us on this road to net zero?
That's a big question.
Just before you go there, I've got to pick one thing. I think you're dead sorry. It'll kill me not to say it. So I think you're right, George. I think that the thing about MMC, it just needed its time. So I built 25 years ago an MMC factory that was nigh on £20 million that was building a house every half an hour.
Wow.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That today is at its prime and is delivering houses. And what I've seen from other house builders now, including Barratt, is a number of us have invested in timber frame companies. So I think the time has come where MMC is a viable option. It's not, that's why I said and. I don't do it's either one or the other.
I agree
it is
with that.
not.
100%.
It is and.
100%.
Yeah. And at some point MMC will become maybe the predominant one, but as it stands, it doesn't matter. Yeah. We need houses for our customers and for our people. And you've just gone through a period of COVID where house building and house purchasing has continued, and that only means there is a lack of housing. And so we've got to deliver the numbers for people to have their own homes or rent, whichever way we go. Yeah. So I think for me, around that whole, MMC, I think the time has come, and George, what you're saying, because you're right, the planning and warranty, but I think we've learned over the last 25 years on how to manage that. I think mortgage lenders are more viable looking at MMC. I think there's lots going for MMC. I think the one point I would make with MMC, we've spent the last numerous years getting MMC off. The thing that makes it work for us is picking not only the right location, as in the area of the country, but actually the right location regarding MMC. If you've got a fast selling site, it helps because MMC is fast. Yeah. And the whole benefit of MMC is that you can build them fast to a high quality. So I think quality shouldn't be discussed, whether it's traditional or MMC.
It's universal.
It should just be high quality,
we're on the
shouldn't
same
it?
page.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, I shouldn't say I don't care about how a house is built, because of course I do. But for me, if there's a house that's traditionally built with traditional trades, fantastic. As long as it's really, really good and the standards are really high and it's well designed and it's well built.
I think it's important. I don't know if
I took you off your track then. Apologies.
Many of our listeners might not know what MMC is. So if you could elaborate on what you...
Well, it's modern methods of construction. I mean, it's the phrase has now been changed a little bit, where we'll say design for manufacture rather than for construction. But Oliver's right. If we start kind of saying, modern methods of construction and a factory-built house or a panelized system house is really innovative, but a traditional conventional house isn't, I think that's too polarized. I see a lot of innovation in traditional forms of construction. For me, both should be happening, and all of us on the same page. It's about creating the best quality housing we can, of the most appropriate style in the right areas, using the right skills to be able to build that house. So whether it's traditional or modern methods of construction, I don't think it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because we need both. I mean, one thing I wanted to touch on a bit, and it's slightly away from Barratt's, but I know that Oliver would be passionate about it as well, is the self-build.
Yeah.
And I do think that we've talked a little bit about social housing. We've got some great social housing providers who are taking a fantastic long-term approach. You've got some of the big house builders who are innovating with modern methods of construction and building and investing in factories to do houses in a more modern way while still doing their more traditional conventional house types. All of that's absolutely fine. For me, I think we need to be pushing self-build as a country more, a lot more, because self-builders will go that extra step further to spend some extra pennies to get not a much higher quality product, but they might go beyond the building regs, for example. They might raise the bar to a different level because they're building a house for them that'll last hopefully 15, 20, 25 years. And I do... One of the things in this country, even we've got about 15,000 self-builders per year. Now, it's actually quite a lot. I mean, if you think Barratt's are doing 18,000 houses a year, you could say collectively all the self-builders are one of the biggest house builders in the UK. But we should probably be doing a lot more. And I think that comes to kind of availability of land and people being given the opportunity to build their houses. And I think then there'll be an even bigger shift. So that's when Oliver's saying, and. It's not one or the other. It's let's do that, let's do that, let's do that. I do think self-build's a big issue in the UK.
I guess that's the road to net zero. There isn't one silver bullet that you put into place. You have to have these different strategies to reach that goal.
As long as they're all about building to the highest quality and adopting renewable green forms of technology to make those houses as zero carbon as possible. It doesn't matter who's doing it or where they're doing it or how they're doing it.
It's just that becomes a norm, doesn't it? There isn't a new adaptation. That green just becomes a norm, and that's just how we do it.
But we're getting there. So the conversations that me and Oliver would have had, 25 years ago, I mean, we were like kind of hippies, if you like, of the construction industry.
Trailblazers.
No, we kind of were. We'd go on. We did. I remember we met at the BRE a long time ago, and we'd be banging the drum for the same thing, and people would look at us as if we're a bit weird sometimes. And now everybody wants to do it. I mean, Oliver's even said you've got, the city, the financial centres are saying, hang on a minute, we now need to be funding green projects. I mean, we weren't having that conversation with the banks 20 odd years ago. You just weren't. You might have to go to a very unusual, discreet lender somewhere who would be talking about kind of green mortgages and green lending. So from that point of view, it's quite staggering the amount of change that's happened in the industry, definitely in the last 10 years. We might still have a long way to go. We all know that, but that's all part of evolution and innovation rather than invention. I mean, if you think about Ecodan, sorry, Oliver,
No.
like you look at the way that your consumers and the homeowners can engage with the product and with the technology, and remotely tap into information, through the people that you've got working at Mitsubishi to problem solve. Well, that's because of amazing Wi-Fi technology and the internet. I mean, my Wi-Fi was really clunky a few years ago, you know what I mean? And it's taken all of that to step up and change, where collectively lots of things have happened at the same time for us to see if we can do things differently now. And that's really exciting, I think.
I mean, I think there's a couple of points that you bring out, George, I'd have to say. I think the self-build market is great because that's customers choosing. And we do a lot of research with our customers. And it's interesting that customers, and what's benefited MMC is guys like you and others on the TV where self-build use MMC. So when people get to choose, they choose a lot of MMC, don't they? Because, like you said, they have more knowledge. They're more informed of the systems that they're choosing.
So it's the educated consumer now.
Yeah, well, they go to the shows.
Yeah.
It's like when, they go to the shows. It's like, when if you get into a big fashion, like I'm just into triathlons, you go to the show and you look around and you do research, especially with the YouTube now. You've got no excuses. So I think we look at self-build and our customer research because they inform the decisions we make. I mean, we build lots of houses. We make some of those decisions for our customers because we think it helps them. But we still have to look. I mean, the classic would be now that whole kitchen diner move, or even more importantly with COVID, offices in homes.
Yeah, working at home.
Yeah. So there's a big step change.
I mean, the reason why I mentioned that, because you were saying, what can the government do? And I think the government are bringing in lots of support for us to get to net zero carbon by 2050. But I mentioned self-build because I think that's a great opportunity for the industry generally. Mm-hmm. If you go to countries like New Zealand, it's kind of normal for people to build their own house. Mm-hmm. The number of self-builders they have is quite amazing, really. And there's companies out there who will buy the land, get the planning generally for, if you like, design codes for a number of different house types.
Is that because planning's easier over there? And is that one of the things that we could work on?
Planning's not easier. It's just a different approach. It's a different way of doing things and they don't do this everywhere. There's big house builders in New Zealand who build lots of houses and sell them, just like our house builders do here. But you do have more developers, in inverted commas, that just sell off plots. So they will put in the infrastructure and the roads and the water and everything else. But you basically buy a plot and it's expected that you'll build that house. Now, you've got to comply with standards of quality and some of the parameters that they've got within the planning documents, if you like. So you can't just go and build a 4-story house on one site and a bungalow on the next one. It will say for that plot, this is the footprint and this is the rough scale. But after that, you can kind of do what you like. The good thing about that is people are, as I said, going to a higher level, if you like, hopefully, if they're good enough, going to a higher level in terms of the spec of that building, because it's their home for many, many, many years. And they're not building it to sell, they're building it for them. They'll then overspec the insulation. They'll then start looking at technologies that
the future-proofing.
The future-proofing, but all of us kind of talked about it there, where they are putting their time and their effort and their money into building their house. They're responsible for doing it, and they don't want to mess it up. And so they research, and become a very well-informed self-builder. So they're not just a consumer. If I was going to buy a house from Barratt, I expect Barratt to do all of that work for me and all that specification work and take off all
that's
that.
What you're paying for, isn't it?
That's what we're paying for. And you just want to, and some people just want to buy a finished product, and rightly so. But I do think it's interesting with the self-builder that they become more informed, they push themselves on, and tend to, not always, but tend to push the specification way beyond the building regs, way beyond. So instead of just putting an amount of insulation they need to tick a box with building regs, they'll say, well, actually, you know what? We'll spend a bit more money and put 3 times the amount in, but that means we've got to build a house in a slightly different way. But I'd love to do that because it's going to save me loads of money for the next 20 years on my running costs. So I think that's a great opportunity. I mean, it's ironic that we've got probably the lowest number of self-builders, per head in the developed world. But all of my programs, all of Kevin McLeod's programs, nearly every show that we put out are self-builders. That's what they are. We export these programs all over the world to push self-building, but we've still got a very low number when you look at our population compared to what we should have. And I just threw that in because when you said, what should the government be doing? I think they're doing lots of great things, but they could do even more to promote self-building here.
I'm going to ask you a question because I've got to ask, right? So all those people that are making those choices, so when we do our customer research and we ask them about what's important, I'm going to be really boring now, but I'm going to tell you that location, amount of bedrooms, how good the kitchen looks. Yeah. Right. And they have a budget. Most, and you'll correct me here, George, but most of the self-build guys that I did, when I started my career, I did self-build in Cornwall. Most of the guys you work with, or most of the programs I look, they always go over budget, pretty much. Yeah. And I don't, do you know why? The question is, why is it when they're making their own choices, they'll go over budget? But with us, they'll like, no, if I've got that budget, I might want to move. I think that's going to change, but they won't always move it to green or rarely green. They'll move it to tiles and taps and other things. And isn't it interesting, that dynamic, that when they're with you, they will go over budget and they will think, this is
blaming me for them going over budget.
Yeah, definitely you. But when they are, no, it's nothing to do with it. They're making their own choices. You have no influence on that. So it's interesting that when they're making their own choices and they've got that knowledge, they will spend substantially more on their home.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of different reasons for that. And some might even over-specify in some areas. And some might just waste money, to be honest. They might spend extra money on things that you maybe don't necessarily need to. I think the good self-builder, because there are bad self-builders as well. I mean, let's be honest, it's just human nature. I think the good self-builder will get the balance right. They don't necessarily over-specify the kitchen too much. They might not over-specify the bathrooms too much. They want a good quality because they don't want to replace it in so many years. But I am noticing people, certainly in the last 10 years, who are making greener choices to make the house not just green for the environment, but more comfortable for them and saving on their energy bills. So there's a bit of that going on. But you're dead right. There are some who'll go, I'm not bothered about loads of insulation. I just want a better kitchen.
But the good, and a bit of me said about the self-build market is, we are now starting to see that move. So especially with these hikes in the energy bills, you're starting to see people thinking about the energy efficiency. So forget about the city or Barratt and all our drivers. Actually, the customer is now thinking about that bill. Government, let me answer that question for you. George took us off, not me. So with government... Hang
on, you changed the subject. You just said before I answer that and you went on a different route. Give yourself some
time. So government. Let me talk about government. So I would have said that government, back in the Code for Sustainable Homes days, which was 2014, 2015 or whatever, government were pulling us as industry. It was pull. Come on, we're setting the standard. Yeah. Now, as I talked about, because of city drivers from house builders, all of the stakeholders towards sustainability, you guys, everybody, government are part of the journey. We are on that journey with or without them. Now they're regulating, which is important because we have to have a minimum bar, and that because the worst thing I'm always nervous about is we have a bad project where someone who doesn't care about how things get put in, puts renewable technologies, it doesn't go right, and it ends up in the wrong place, and then people don't want it. So I think we've got to have a minimum. But I think, so government have to set that. But actually, I think where government play an important role for us is in numerous areas. But one, I think through Homes England and others, they're doing some great innovative projects allowing us to do R&D to support the industry. And it's important. I think one of the things I sometimes think of Barratt, and we are part of the R&D program because we're the size that we can have people like myself and Dan and others that can do this kind of work. But when we're doing it with you, you will take that knowledge and you'll send it to the self-builders and the smaller house builders because you've done it with us. You've built the Nunny. You've learned with us what it's like because you're an air source heat pump company. I'm a developer. We've got to learn about each other. So I think that's one. So enable innovation and R&D. That's one. And really collaboration and all of that. But set the flagship projects, not regulate it. I think they'll do that, but that's not the big driver. It's set the journey that we want to go on. The second one you touched on. So I wonder how complicated our planning and other aspects are compared to other countries where we do see that drive-through. And I actually, personally am really proud of our planning, because I drive around our country and look at our cities and towns, and in many instances it's worked really well. George, I'm an engineer. You're the architect here, so save me from. But I honestly drive this personally. I drive around. I think, yes, it's important. We are, the old English village and all that. That's important. But there's definitely lots of stages and we do like our documentation. We do like our process. I mean, we've, you could say half of the things that we've developed here have been taken to other countries and they're used as planning in other countries because they recognize that we have systems that are good. I think we've got to work out government, not to water them down, but think about how we can still get the same answer with a more efficient process. I don't know what you think, George. I mean, it's more your area than mine.
I don't want to make it a planning podcast because we'll be here for weeks, but because it's meant to be about zero carbon home. I think, we didn't really have any planning before the late 1940s. And actually we built lots of very beautiful things and beautiful towns and beautiful cities and beautiful house types. You can look at Victorian houses, Edwardian houses, Georgian houses. And we did all of that without planning. And that's because reputation was everything. Mm-hmm. If you were a developer or house builder back in the Georgian period, and if you built terrible stuff, your reputation was absolutely tarnished. You were nudged out of society. You weren't allowed back at court. It was at that level. Or you were a significant landowner and your reputation was put at risk. And I think since we've had planning, you could argue that the pendulum's kind of swung the other way, that sometimes we've got too much red tape and too much bureaucracy and things take too long.
Do you think that links back to what Oliver was saying about the standards and okay, have some regulation? But I think now what you've got is, for any business, you're so open to people giving you an opinion on your business through Trustpilot, Facebook, Instagram. You've got it there. So
we've got public consultation through planning as well, which is important. People need to have a voice about what's being built in their local area. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Sometimes I wonder whether planning gets bogged down in the level of detail of things it shouldn't really get involved in, where a planner's time has taken ages about whether an extension's half a foot that way or half a foot that way, and at the same time they're the planner for a major residential development around the corner, and you think, hang on a minute, the scale's quite extreme. If we set up some universal rules that everybody believes in about being green and green spaces and green technology and zero carbon homes, then really we should be it's a bit like setting a pattern book for self-builders. You set a certain standard at a certain level and then say, do you know what, as long as you comply with all of that stuff, just get on with it and do it. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, definitely. And it's a different world now. You just don't get away with not building a great place. You want to sell it and people live in it. I mean, we've been through that in the 60s, 70s and 80s as an industry, and we've learned our lessons. But I'm with you, I think it should be on reputation. And as I said, I think we can get the same outcome, but I'm going to move off planning because, like I said, I'm an engineer and I'm very George way.
The only thing I'll touch on planning, though, is I think we talk about a zero carbon home and we make it sound like it's this product, it's this kind of box with a roof on it and with windows and a door. But I think where that sits is really important about the green agenda as well. So, how are we building roads? How are we building footpaths? How are we planting trees? How are we going to get water there? How do we get waste away? Where do you put the bins? Like wheelie bins look like the bane of a planner's life sometimes because they're just everywhere, And so for me, it's kind of holistic thinking, not just about the house being zero carbon, it's about the estate it sits on, and everything working together to create a green, sustainable environment.
But if you look abroad and look at how they're tackling zero carbon, so you look at Denmark, really leading, or Sweden, they do a lot of district solutions on low rise, where it's, the energies, in some ways is just a different approach. Yeah. And yet, like you said, they think about a holistic, and you're right, because interesting, we're having numerous conversations and, because your house, I mean, the Zed House is, it's 127% of RL. So it means that 4 to 5 days of the week, that house produces its own energy. But the reality of it is you're not going to need it. So you need to be able to sell it in its simplest form to someone else on the site who needs it.
Yeah.
So we're going to have this interaction.
Trading. Energy trade, yeah.
Yeah, so trading of energy and support so that we're not reliant on the major producers of energy. Because like wind turbines and things like that. There's a sort of integration of all of this.
And that's why I think, we've called it zero carbon home today, but it should be more like zero carbon living, because it's about how you live in that house and how you live on that estate and what you drive and whether you take the bus and whether the bus is green or not and how far people have to walk and what you're buying from the local shops, what are they selling, the local pub, where's it getting its beer from, and has that been delivered by, fossil fuel guzzling lorries? I know it sounds a bit bonkers making it that big, but it should be about zero carbon living, not just about the house itself.
It's everything that we've always talked about. It's really simple, and that energy trading will be simple. It'll be an app. It'll be a lot of that pre-think will be done for a homeowner. They won't have to be engaged in complex processes. A lot of those decisions will be made by AI intelligence, and it will be done,
Yeah, and I keep using the same phrase on a number of podcasts. That's why we're in a period of really exciting transition. But there's no doubt about it, whether it's government or whether it's industry or whether it's the banks or whatever, the city, it's all moving in the right direction. We've just got to collaborate and make sure we get there.
I think you raised, for me, what the Zed House probably brought out as one key challenge. So when we sell our houses to 18,000 houses a year, I sell them to, singles all the way through to professionals, all the way up to 70, 80-year-olds. And when you throw this technology in the home, you've got to make it simple because they've got varying levels of interaction. I keep coining a phrase, which is we need the remote control for a house, because that isn't out there, I don't think. So each of the technologies we've put in has its own app.
Yep.
Yeah. But hey, they don't talk to each other. Now, I get annoyed with the 10 apps I've got on my iPhone, because just order food. Yeah, I just want one. I just want to,
smart technology is great as long as it's not too smart and too complicated.
So for me, we're now looking at some of the new next challenge of houses that we're going to do. And I'll be honest, this is what I've set Salford University and others, the smart technology guys, is got to be able to talk to each other, because I literally want a remote control, one app where someone says, oh, isn't it interesting? I've produced X amount of energy and, Octopus are the partner on the Zed House. They've sold it for this month. And actually today I haven't spent any money on energy, whatever. And I've taken the energy out of my car because, as you know, in the Zed House, we've got this vehicle to grid. I've used the battery in my car to save some energy when it was expensive. So I've now sold it back to the grid so I can use it in the washing machine. But it's simply told to me on something. And that isn't, I don't think that's there. Or if it is, that's my challenge. Where is it?
Yeah. From my perspective, I think if you went back 5 or 10 years, it definitely wasn't there. And companies did not want to collaborate or share each other's APIs and things like that. But what I have noticed over the past 5 years is, companies being much more open to collaboration. We all realise that we're not the silver bullet, and maybe there is a race out there for someone to take the most dominant position in that control of the house, and that's certainly out there. But there's a definite appetite for that collaboration and sharing our specific skill sets and our specific technologies, because we know that is, if there was one silver bullet, that would be it. Is the control of the whole house. So,
yeah, it's the Betamax VHS discussion, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's that classic.
Yeah,
so I think that's great to hear, because, I was talking to my son, he's just turning 16, much cleverer than I am about smart technology, and he was talking about open sourcing. So this is where you share whatever knowledge you have. And he was telling me a story that one of the game manufacturers open sourced their technology, and their technology is now used in surgery. Yeah. Because they said, have it. Because actually the way I stay at the front is because I keep innovating, keep evolving. I don't stay at the front because I hide it and I don't want anyone to have it. And that's what they did. And that gaming company, and now all of them have said, open source all we have. Because actually now what they're saying is, from that work that was done over there in healthcare, it's now fed back into the gaming world, and they've developed better software because of it. So I think... I think we're in a world where this whole, innovation will be sharing. It will be working together. And that stands for us guys, you know? Yeah. We've got to work together and understand each other's challenges.
So Oliver, looking forward a couple of years, we have 2025, you have the Future Home Standard. What impact do you think that is going to have on your day-to-day business and and how you do things.
Yeah, so let me start by humanising it. So we're going to move away from gas to electric.
Yeah.
So I'll humanise it by saying we're going to use, all our cooking will be done by electricity. And there are people out there that have always cooked on a gas ring. But actually, the advancement of electric cooking, for example, so there's going to be a step change because we're going to move away from gas. Now, the way it affects us, which you know, is we will move to technologies like air source heat pumps to deliver our energy and our heating, hot water and heating. So probably the big step change we're going to see is that technology bringing in, so for future homes, which is air source heat pumps. So we will see every home with an air source heat pump type technology to deliver the heat.
So is it going to be the end of the gas cooker? Is that
It will, yeah. It will
That's
be.
it?
Yeah, because you can't.
That's it, 2025.
There will not be a gas connection to your house.
In the new build.
In new
build. Yeah. So, and then I think the other things that the 2025 regulation is bringing in, which is really, I think, good to see, is that, you know, it will drive the fabric further. So, I mean, we as a company believe in fabric first, and we've coined this thing of fit and forget. Because if you do a great insulation in the house, and you talked about the self-build, the reason they put loads of insulation is because they've calculated that firstly, it's a no maintenance, and secondly, it affects their bills. So that 2025 will drive there. Now, it will introduce some challenges. So I think we'll have very airtight buildings, so we're going to have to think about ventilation. I think we're going to have to think about overheating, because we're pretty much putting a very, very warm North Face coat on our homes. And so we've got to think about the environment in the home. And that's part of what we've done at the Zed House. We've thought about ventilation, we've thought about overheating. And actually those have both been introduced and looked at within the regulations.
So there you have it, the zero carbon home. I want to say huge thanks to my guests, George and Oliver. Thanks for your interesting debate and conversation today. Thanks for watching, guys. Please share, subscribe, review the Ecodan Serious About Sustainability podcast. And until next time, goodbye.